Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about 10 rep sets and accessory movements. Now, a lot of times the whole point of accessories will come up and people will say, well, what is an accessory movement? What does that mean? Well, an accessory movement is anything that you use for hypertrophy. And more specifically, usually with a focus of hypertrophy on muscles that you need to grow to get stronger at lifts that you care about. And I'm not saying we shouldn't care about all of our lifts, because any lift that's worth doing is worth us caring about. Right? If we're going to do it, we should care about it. But what I mean more specifically is that your primary lifts, in my case, variations of the squat, bench, and deadlift. Right? Variations of the squat, bench, and deadlift. And a perfect example, last year or earlier this year, I hit some PRs, right? I hit a really solid squat PR. Then my squat started regressing, and one of my biggest supplemental lifts was what? The hip thrust. And at that time, I had attributed the hip thrust to helping with my squat. However, here's the issue. I was able to do something like 5 sets of 10 on the hip thrust with a certain amount of weight when I got my squat PR, and I continued to make progress, right? I put something like another 15 pounds onto my 10 rep sets on the hip thrust. My squat regressed slightly. Again, we could argue that, well, there was overtraining and overreaching and stuff involved because of what I was doing with my training at the time, and I'll agree. Definitely a factor. But irrespective of overreaching, if you were getting stronger at 10 rep sets on a lift and you're not seeing improvements on other stuff, what does that tell you? That it's not putting muscle in the right places where you need it. And that matters, particularly when we start running more complex systems like the conjugate method and things that I do, because those variations of the big lifts are used to build a lot of our hypertrophy too, with the speed work and stuff, right? And we work with those off percentages of our max and trying to hit certain bar speeds. So if we're not getting stronger, we're actually shortchanging a lot of our overall growth as well. These things feed into each other. Right, people have to understand how size and strength, and as far as performance goes, how these things feed into each other, particularly for a well-rounded athlete. We don't care about for bodybuilding purposes. We're talking about people who want to be athletic, strong, who do a sport and want to be jacked as hell. Right? That's what we're talking about, because that's what we cover here on this channel. That's what we cover. But in that case, I knew that the hip thrust wasn't doing what I wanted it to do, and we had to sub it out and put other stuff in. And now I'm building back up with other things. But here's the thing to look at. We have to pick supplemental lifts that are going to help us get better at our main lifts. So for example, let's say you're doing the closed grip bench press. And I've got 2 exercises that I use to feed each other here. As a general rule, if you get stronger on your closed grip bench pressing, all of your pressing will get stronger. Most people realize that, by the way. Most people who use the closed grip bench press, and it's very heavily used in strength sports for a reason, know that it increases your other presses. The closed grip bench has a really good stimulus to fatigue ratio. Moves the weight a very long distance compared to a lot of other presses. A little more tricep involvement. It's a great hypertrophy exercise. It's a great hypertrophy exercise. And it tends to increase both your overhead press and your wide grip bench press. And most lifters care about one of those 2 things. Irrespective of what you're training for, most people want a really good overhead press or a good bench press, depending on what they compete in, or just for general strength. Those are 2 lifts with really big strength standards that a lot of people care about. Closed grip bench will feed both of them. And what you will usually see is them scaling. So much so that you can predict changes in your max on the closed grip. If you're one of the people, and most people are, by the way, there are exceptions, but if you're one of the people who gets very good carryover from the closed grip bench to your other pressing, you will be able to extrapolate your maxes based upon increases. In other words, you know that if you go from 200 to 215 for your 10 rep max on the closed grip press, that your max bench and possibly your max press, your overhead press, particularly if you use a slightly narrower grip on it, they're going to tend to scale with that in terms of percentage, right? They tend to scale with it. And that extra 10 rep max is usually due to hypertrophy. Right? That's not neuromuscular efficiency. If we get stronger at a 10 rep max, if you put 15 pounds on your 10 rep max on a big exercise with the same range of motion and technique, that's not from neuromuscular efficiency. That's not neurological in nature. That's almost entirely, if not entirely, due to muscle growth. And you're also seeing it as a direct performance carryover. So you could extrapolate that over. And we can use that. And so that's what I would say. When you're looking at a lot of your lifts, the close grip is an easy one because it's true for most people. You could do that with other movements though, couldn't you? What about a hack squat? A hip belt squat? A good morning? Right? A lot of these other movements. How about an incline bench? If they carry over effectively to the lifts that you care about the most, if you see a sizable increase in your 10 rep max, it will scale. It will scale accordingly. So much so that if you start coaching multiple lifters and athletes like I do, right? Start getting up into those double digits. I don't know how many I'll have at the time this video comes out, but I have had 20. I've had up to 20 clients at one point this year. So when you look at it from that perspective of when you're able to compare your people, you'll notice a lot of lifts scale very, very well. And you can actually compare your different lifters and know that if a certain lifter reaches this much weight on this exercise, he's probably going to be about this strong on his max on another lift. And you can start comparing your different lifters and set benchmarks and goals. It's really fascinating to behold. But you can learn to do this with your own training. What I would say is that you can extrapolate this over. And if that lift goes up a certain percentage and the primary lift doesn't go up, it doesn't scale proportionately on your heavy work or your maxes, what does that tell you? That tells you that the muscles that you're working primarily on this accessory movement are not limiting your big lift. Something else is limiting you, not those muscles, which means maybe that exercise might be a misallocation of resources. You could find something else that'll put just as much size on you, but do it in slightly better ratios that make you stronger quicker. Right? It's not doing something that you need it to do. But you know what? We could do this with other exercises too, can't we? People say, what do you mean? All right. What if your closed grip bench press isn't going up? You could take something like a JM press that feeds the closed grip bench and set strength goals on that. That if I can increase this JM press by X percentage, it should carry over to my closed grip and make my closed grip stronger. And if my closed grip gets stronger, my bench goes up or my press goes up. That's an option. And you can set strength standards in that same regard. And if they carry over downstream, you get carryover to your big lift too. And incidentally, if you figure out what muscles are the weak links in a big supplemental lift and you hypertrophy them with a smaller exercise, odds are those same muscles are the weak link on your big exercise too. So you really end up with a 2-for-1 out of it. You could do the same thing with something like a good morning. Perfect example would be, let's say your hamstrings are kind of limiting your good mornings a little bit. And you know the good morning improves your deadlift. Let's say you conventional deadlift and you see a direct ratio. Well, you could set strength goals on a smaller single joint movement for the hamstrings. I don't care whether it's a hamstring curl machine or a glute ham raise, but you could set performance goals on it. That when you reach them, you should see a performance increase on that other supplemental lift. So we can do the same thing with even smaller exercises and then go downstream all the way back towards our big movement, can't we? Right? Because usually, what do we find? That if your hamstrings are the weak link in your good morning, they're probably the weak link in your conventional deadlift. If the triceps are the weak link in your closed grip bench press, they're probably the weak link in your normal bench press, and so on and so forth. So we can apply the same thing with smaller movements and work up to our bigger movements the same way. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.